You're listening to Third Wave Trade Talks, a podcast that explores the dynamic world of global trade and compliance. I'm Grant Sernick, Head of Sales and Marketing at 3rd Wave, where we empower businesses to master the complexities of international trade. Join me as I sit down with industry experts, innovators, and thought leaders to explore the trends, challenges, and insights that shape the future of global trade. All right, and we're live with Kshitij Parashar. Kshitij, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Grant. Thank you for the invitation. And really looking forward to this because we have been talking for a long time. And I've been trying to reconvene our conversations, which we started back in the beginning of this year, right? And obviously, like we followed it up with from Manifesto, TPM, and then on our LinkedIn community. So it just feels good to get back to it again and talk about us, talk about what's happening, what are we doing in our space, and looking forward to it. So thank you for the invite, and
Well, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long while. Let me more formally introduce you. So you work at the DCSA, or for the DCSA, which is the Digital Container Shipping Association. Maybe you can start our listeners off by giving a background on what DCSA is, and the work that you guys do.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, DCSA, Digital Container Shipping Association. So we are a industry body which is working in the container shipping industry as a non-profit organization, which has been tasked to develop standards for the container shipping industry and drive digitalization. The idea of DCSA started way back in 2019. When all the big container shipping lines in the world and all the top nines are the usual suspects which we talk about, and I don't need to specify all the names here, but they came up with an idea that we have a problem in container shipping industry where we see there's a lack of digitalization. A lot of things which are happening on paper, for example. But also it is kind of a gap looking towards the future, where the future is heading towards, and container shipping is falling behind that. So with that idea in 2019, DCSA was founded in April 2019. And this year is our 5th year of existence. And in the last 5 years, we have done a lot of work which has enabled us to not only give a direction towards the digitalization of container shipping, but also be that voice of the industry which can bring the whole ecosystem towards a one common language or a one common way of working in terms of standardization. So that's about the mission, so to say, right, which we have stayed true to in the last 5 years. And this is what DCSA does, and DCSA is. And I will dwell deeper into what are actually the work which we do, how it is all driving the digitalization in the industry. But that's perhaps one of the topics to explore further in this chat.
Right. So, okay. So you're an association of the big container shipping lines, or the members are the shipping lines, and your mission is to standardize the data and data sets that are used in the container shipping world, because practically speaking, nobody really believes, especially these large containers, that having a proprietary message set for any of the things that they do is of any consequence or strategic advantage. It's much more preferable that everybody's working on the same data set, same language, and if we can achieve that's going to push the industry forward. So I'm wondering, so who are I realize that the association members, or the founding members of this association, were many of the big container, like steamship lines. But your perspective is actually much broader than just the steamship lines. So who else do you care about, and why?
So, like I said, container shipping is not just about the container shipping lines; it's the whole ecosystem. So the container shipping lines are sitting in the middle of this whole network, right? Because they are the ones, transporting goods via their container carriers from point A to point B, and every other party is involved in a smooth transition and smooth flow of goods, right? So you talk about freight forwarders, you talk about ports, you talk about terminals, you talk about in some cases you can also look into specific things like banks, insurers, for a typical thing like a bill of lading, for example, right? These are the interested parties. But if you just think it from that perspective, our focus area is to work towards the BCOs, or the beneficial cargo owners, and to be helping the customer experience, because eventually all the customers who are from the container shipping line are the beneficial cargo owners, and the enablers for a smoother supply chain are the freight forwarders, and also guys like you, solution providers, who are also part of the same chain, which enables data exchange from one party to the other, right? So, I mean, you are sitting in one space of solution providers, but there is a plethora of log tech companies, as we know it, right? Who are either visibility provider, a TMS provider. Each one of them has a part to play in the whole supply chain, and when it specifically comes to container shipping. So these are the actors. So as you can see, it's the whole ecosystem, it's the whole industry which we are talking about, and which we are trying to work together with. Of course, as an association, we are founded by these container shipping lines. We are not for profit, so our mission is to provide open source standards to everyone who's out there. But in the meantime, what we have seen in the last 5 years also is that we need to work closely and collaborate closely with all the ecosystem members to make sure that the work which we are doing on standardization gets picked up fast, and the industry is faster to move towards digitalization, comparing to what airlines did, right? So a typical example is of IATA, for example, and the airway bill. I think it took them around 10 years or close to that to get it going, right? And if I have to put that in perspective, also with the digitalization wave going on in the world, and all the things which are, now changing for good in terms of, things like advanced data analytics, advancements around AI and stuff, we have to prepare for the future. So the amount of time it will require for us to get into that space will be less, but the challenge is not different. The challenge here is the same. We have to work towards the whole industry and to get all of them on board to work together. So this is also the reason these kind of conversations are important, right? Because you have your group of customers, and the others in your space who are also competing with you have the same thing, right? So what we want to enable is that data exchange should not be something which should be a differentiator in the industry. Everyone should be having access to a standard form of data. And then if that is there, then you can set up that as a baseline, and then you work towards with your own innovative aspects of doing business to make an offering which kind of, solves the pain points of different individuals who you consider as customers, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, it just strikes me as it's such a massive problem, and it's great that you guys are trying to tackle it. Just taking one step back, you mentioned the term BCO, or beneficial cargo owner. For those of you that don't know what that is, that would be like if you are an importer or an exporter, or if you're like a Nike or a Walmart, you are a BCO. It's sort of like an industry term that references, the person who ultimately receives the goods. And we're going to get to, as we get on, I don't want to jump there quite yet, but the idea, one of the problems that we at 3rdwave solve is the idea that it's both a shipment, like a box that's moving, but also product inside the shipment. And this is a thing that I was actually watching with the DCSA on DCSA. The DCSA website is amazing. You guys have done a really, really good job of creating that. There's a 2-minute video on DCSA and what it is. And somebody, can't remember who the woman was who makes the comment. There's a comment where everybody cares about where their product is as it moves along. And it was sort of like a throwaway comment. When I say throwaway, it hid the big problem that certainly the 3rdwave customers have, which is people think about the container and the product that's in it as the same thing. From a technology perspective, there's a translation that has to be made between the container, which has a license plate and data associated against it, and metadata associated against it, and the product that's contained within it. And everybody thinks that that's an easy thing to do, or they talk about it as if it's an easy thing to do, and it's insanely complicated. This is what 3rdwave does, and it's one of the big problems that exists within the industry that, generally speaking, doesn't get talked about enough. And we're going to get there in a little bit, but I want to go back to, your mission is a big one. How do you standardize information within sort of a reasonably large industry? And I'm wondering how you guys have prioritized what are you tackling first, and how are you going about tackling the various elements of it? Because there really are a great number of things where you could go and you can't do everything because it's too big a project. So what have you guys started on?
Yeah. So first things first, right? So focus area. So you're talking about what have we done and how we have done it, right? So just to give you a background, right? When DCSA began, and it began as an industry body to serve towards digitization and standardization, we worked together with the container shipping lines and with their subject matter experts, right? So then it comes, okay, what are the processes we are talking to digitalize, right? Now, there are typical things which happen in terms of when a container goes from right from when it is booked all the way through its journey, like the end-to-end journey of the container, and there are different processes involved, right? There's a element of the container itself traveling from place A to place B, right? The physical movement of it. Then there's a movement of the transport, of the mode of transport. It is on, right? So you talk about a truck or a ship or a barge, so and so forth, right? And then there is an element of documentation trail also following, right? So, a booking is there, then a bill of lading is there, then an arrival notice is there, the shipping instructions, and all these kind of things which kind of make up for this whole complex area of container shipping go hand in hand to make sure that whatever is booked by the customer gets delivered at the end, right, in the container. So what we started off was what we call it as an industry blueprint. Now the name itself gives you an idea that it's a map of all the processes which are happening in the container shipping industry. So this was one of the first tasks which we did. We sat together with all the experts from the container shipping lines who are founding members of DCSA, went through their processes, and then made a common industry blueprint coming from all these processes, which was an agreed blueprint by all the carriers that this is the way we work and this is the way the processes should be, right? Then came the point.
Just on that point, Kshitij, was there, as you were going through that exercise, so you're sitting there and like just for example, so there's a booking process. Everybody has a booking process.
Yeah.
How much disagreement or variation was there between the carriers as you're going through that exercise?
I think this is a common theme for us, right? So we have to understand that although everyone works in the same industry, everyone from the container members have a different way of working. Be it systems, be it processes, be it cultural aspects. So a lot of our work which we do is around change management and stakeholder management. So how to make sure that each and every one of these parties who are also competing businesses get together on the same table and are willing to work together to be on the same page about some things, right? And this is the challenge we also face on our daily basis, right? Because yes, everyone has their own way, and this is why we are existing, right, as a standards body, because there's a lack of a common way of working. So the challenge is not that we got out of it. I think that is going to stay as a constant because of the nature I explained. But it's also on the other side, it gives a very good perspective, right? The amount of potential or the opportunities we have in order to make the right steps toward digitalization, right? So when we went through that exercise of blueprint, we saw, okay, this is massive. This is what it is. And this is what it means to be on this task. And then from there, your typical prioritization exercises happen. There's a component which you might be aware of EDI, which is kind of the standard, if you like it or not, the standard of a container shipping industry, right? Now there are obviously different proponents. It is still the standard, or whether it's a standard or it's a customizable data set. Let's not dwell into those details of it. But that was also a beginning of where we could focus upon. So, okay, we looked at different data points, different data sets. Okay, what is the volume of EDI messages which are being used by these people? Where are the volumes leading us? What is being used the most? And what are typical process areas or messages which are extremely important for the customer? And when I say customer, it's the BCO, right? As one BCO, but also internally, there is also a lot of things happening between the carriers. There is this something called a vessel sharing agreement. Then there are slots which are being shared by the carriers on the ships and everything. So this also requires an internal level of integration on the data exchange, so that the schedule information can flow from the operational partners. The data around storage, the data around moves can also be exchanged into an operational environment. The customer has nothing to do with it. However, the operational efficiencies are somewhat important to the end consumer, right? So these were like the areas which we talked about, and we came to the fact that, track and trace is one of the areas which requires standardization, but it's also something which could benefit a broader community, right?
Let's just dwell on that for a couple minutes. So
sure.
Maybe. Well, let me talk a little bit about the problems that we use. So we consume track and trace information, as you know.
Yep.
And we suffer. This has always been a problem. It's a problem for the industry, sort of at large, right? So I want to say, going back 10 years, if we were to go back 10 years, if you wanted track and trace information, there was maybe one or two companies that centralized data sets. One was Intra, and I think did GT Nexus do it as well? I think GT Nexus might have done it. And if you wanted to get status message updates from steamship lines, you had to have a contract with them. It was very difficult to do. You had to be did you have to be a notified party to get that message, which made it, if you were a software provider, very, very difficult, because almost certainly you're not, as a software provider, a notified party unless you somehow got your customers to become notified parties on every single shipment that they book.
And it still is a problem.
Oh, okay, and it remains a problem. Okay, so now you go back 5 years, you had companies like Four Kites, P44, Vision, that somehow were able to convince or data or scrape. I actually don't even know quite what the genesis was of these companies, but they decided to become the next generation API, like centralize the message sets from steamship lines. And I spent a lot of time talking about this and thinking about this because it seems as though the challenge is just centralization and provisioning of that data, but that is totally not the problem, although it is a problem. And one of the concepts within the international supply chain, I think that is very, very poorly understood is the idea of necessary but insufficient. And there are a whole host of problems that are necessary to be solved but insufficient to solve a broader problem or create value. So centralization definitely was necessary. You need to be able to centralize messages. Provisioning of those messages to people is necessary to solve the problem. But it's insufficient because one of the biggest challenges, most complex, is the standardization of the message set, where this was like, it is such a crazy problem, right? So you could have everybody, the example as well, CMA and Hapag-Lloyd and Maersk would have different data sets or different status messages for different things. Okay, and that's certainly true, but it's actually not completely, it doesn't tell the whole picture, because you actually could have, just on Maersk, a message from one terminal at one port for the same message, like arrival. It would be totally different than a Maersk message at a different port at a different terminal, right? So the problem wasn't just across different carriers. It was across the different ports or terminals or geographies and so this problem of standardization is huge. And to just put it more into the context of what happens at a service provider. So at a 3rdwave, in order for us to make any sense of any status message update, we have to understand what it is, which means we have to solve this problem. And a competitor of ours, or somebody else who plays in the same space that wants to do the same thing, they also have to solve this problem. And if you thought that you could import these messages into SAP, which you can't really, but if you thought you could, you would have to solve this problem. It's like anybody that wants to deal with these messages has to solve this problem, right? And so what, I think DCSA basically says to this is, listen, we understand what everybody's problem is, and the carriers sort of acknowledge that this is a problem. An arrival message at a port should look a certain should have a format. And if everybody understands that, and all the carriers also understand that it needs to be this format, then it solves a massive problem for anybody that wants to transact in this data, right? And this data is important for a whole host of reasons. And virtually every player that you mentioned at the beginning, whether it was a bank, an insurance company, a BCO, a carrier, a forwarder, a drayman, whatever, cares about that data element and understanding what it is, right? Yep. And so this problem of standardization really is a massively pervasive problem across the industry. And, I get so excited when I think that about you guys are solving this, and then I get so deflated when I think about this is like such a minor data element across the whole host of, like, there are so many data elements or data sets that exist in the international supply chain, and we're talking about the simplest one out of everything, and we still haven't necessarily solved it yet. And so I get kind of
and I think you touched upon the pain points. so to say, right? The pain points we are trying to solve. So these are the exact pain points which we also recognized when we just started, right? But over the period of time also, when we are looking at individual messages which are being exchanged, right? And I said about track and trace as a beginning. Track and trace is a simple status message, to be able to get updates in a systematic manner and in a standardized common language. Doesn't matter if you have booked a cargo with carrier A or carrier B or carrier C, you will always get the same predictability in terms of what data am I going to get, and then the other part is you are then able to set up your system to react in that way. The problem right now, what you explained also, is not only across the carriers, but within one carrier, across geographies, across terminals. And this boils down to two main aspects. One is digital maturity, right? So you can imagine the global supply chains are spread all over the world, right? So consumers like us, consumerism is also sitting on the phone and ordering something which will come in a ship from probably Far East or something from the LATAM. All those things work in a different way. All the maturities of these regions are in a different way. Although we are seeing a lot of things happening in the space, but this is something which also requires a lot of effort. And to get that common understanding and a common base, right, where everyone it's at a certain level. Now that contributes to the problem that the experience within the same carrier will also be different. A terminal in Southeast Asia versus a terminal in Western Europe versus a terminal in LATAM or versus a terminal in North America will not have the same set of data governance and data exchange protocols, simply because the lack of digital maturity across these different regions. That contributes to the problem. And then you bring down the way industry functions, agencies, headquarters, agents, all these people who book on behalf, right? Those contribute to the problem. So the problem keeps getting bigger and bigger. So that's one, the digital maturity aspect. And the other is the need on, because this is an industry which keeps on running. It never stops. It never stops. I mean, we know the effect of one ship getting stuck in the canal or ships getting rerouted. The industry still functions. It still is going on, and you are getting thousands of containers every year on East Coast, West Coast, Western Europe, wherever, right? Millions and millions of containers are going there. Around 20 to 30 million TEUs are there, constantly on the move. So the industry cannot afford to stop, to have a whole rehaul and, overhaul of the systems. So it's a running machinery. And then you have to insert all these elements of digitalization into it, right? That means you have to keep the things running in parallel. So if you are having paper-based processes, you still have to keep on going. And then you have to expect that the other side, who's the receiving side, the customers, are also ready to embrace that as a technology change. And this is where things also go wrong. Because, right now, container shipping lines might be ready with the latest API specifications and everything to offer to their customer. But in some cases, the customer also is dependent on the supplier who's sitting somewhere far down in Asia or in LATAM. And they're like, okay, but we cannot function like this because they don't have the systems to do things in the right way. So it's a whole overhaul of the system. And that's why it's a slow process. Right? So these are the two main aspects.
So if we just stay on the track and trace or the status messages for a second, so where are we on that then?
Sure. So that's an interesting update from this point, right? Because we are at this situation, and I think it's probably the first time I'm going out and saying this in a forum which will be also public for everyone to see. So track and trace, the first version of the standard was developed in 2020. So that was the first standard of DCSA, which we released. Then we followed it up with some upgrades and everything, right? And then in 2021, we launched the version 2.2 in October 2021. So almost 3 years ago. That was one of the standards which got a lot of traction from the carrier lines because it solved all of their problems. It was a standard which could be used. It was extensive. It was also solving a problems which we explained from an EDI perspective. It was giving almost everything which is there in EDI plus a little bit more in terms of the way it was exchanged. The messages were richer and stuff. So now, last week, which is end of Q3, we have all the DCSA's founding members, which is the 9 container shipping lines, using that same version of the standard. Right?
So is this across all of
DCSA founding members?
So across all of their ports, all of their terminals?
Not the ports. Not the ports. So track and trace is towards the customer, right? So
okay.
So when as a customer you book a cargo and you get the booking number or an equipment number as something to be tracked upon, that is a track and trace service which all the carriers provide, right? And this is the standard which has now been adopted by all the container shipping lines across DCSA founding member landscape. So what it means is, it doesn't matter if you book your cargo with Maersk or MSC or Yangming or ONE or Zim or Hapag-Lloyd or CMA or Evergreen. If you are connected with them on an API, if you are getting track and trace data, it will be through the DCSA standard.
So what would the status? Give me examples of status messages that are now considered standard.
So I'll give a very quick rundown of the standard, right? Just to explain the way we also made the standard, right? So like I explained in the beginning, we have done the equipment part, which is the container itself, right? The physical movement of the container, the transport mode on which the container is there, and then the documentation flow. So these are the 3 main, we call it event types in the track and trace standard, right? So the first event which happens from a documentation perspective is booking is confirmed, right? So basically that is an event. Then you move further along. What can be the next thing? When the empty container arrives at the location of the supplier to get stuck, right? So basically wherever the factories are, you are putting stuff in the container to be getting ready for getting shipped to wherever the final consumer or the BCO is, right? So that is an event, right? Arrival on the export side of the terminal, right? So there's a terminal. Let's take this for example. You're shipping something from Shanghai to Rotterdam.
Yep.
Right.
Okay.
So the factory probably is somewhere in mainland China. Things get stuck there. Then it's picked up by a truck. That is like a pickup by a truck at the given location is an event, which is there, right? And from that point onwards, then you have a gate in information. There are cutoffs which are part of the whole equation, right? So there's a typical cutoff which is there. Then there's a VGM requirement which is also there, right? So you need to declare at a certain point of time. That is the cutoff. All these are also status events because they are like VGM received, gate in confirmed. And what we did was we created this estimated plan and actual timestamps, which give you an idea of the whole transport plan after the confirmation of the booking, which your container or which your booking will go through. Now the expectation.
So you've mapped out the process of basically it's the container life cycle, if you will.
Yes.
And then so all of the steps along that container life cycle, and
are also standardized.
The idea would be that every message is standard. So when you receive it, like a computer should be able to read it and make sense of it.
Yes.
And that there is, you didn't say this, but I'm going to say it, and you can tell me if I'm right or not. There is an expectation that you should receive that message. Correct? Right. Because one of the problems that exists in the industry is like messages don't arrive, or they don't arrive on time, or whatever. And the idea is that this should be...
It's a twofold answer to this, right? So I always explain this as a people, process, and technology component, right? So we have enabled the technology layer by providing a means via the API for everyone who's consuming this information to know what to expect. And when you know what to expect, you will also know what you're missing. If the information is not there, then comes the process part. What is the process to get that information, right? So typically what happens is a gate-in message, which happens at a terminal. The terminal is collecting the message, processing in the batch, and sending it to whoever carrier who's in charge to transport the container, right? So this is an interface thing. So this, we have to see it from a data interface perspective. Who is the source of the data? Who is the data intended for? Who's the middleman in the data? And what is the end consumer, right? So if you just think it as a gate-in as an event, gate-in happens from a truck or a rail, for example. And let's take the example of Chicago, the famous Cicero facility, which has ramps and everything, right? Gate-in happens. Somebody is there to register that this container, this reference container has logged in, and this is supposed to be going into X ship, or X, or if it's on the import side, X drayage, for example. Now that information is collected by the terminal, and then it's sent over to the carrier or the forwarder who's going to pick it up. The latency happens here because paper-based, digital maturity, the things which I talked about, right? So the data component is there, but the process is still something which is not yet there in terms of how fast will be the information. Although what we are seeing is, because the API is coming in and, certain terminals, certain geographies are high on the digital maturity index, so to say, you can get this information typically in 1 or 2 hours of the event occurring, right? But what is happening is there's an awareness which is coming from the use of the standard. Okay, there's a list of 150 events which are there in DCSA's version 2.2 of the standard. And if I am booking the cargo, I am expecting that during the course of the whole journey, I will be getting these event types from the carrier, or from somebody like a visibility platform who is providing data on behalf of, right? So those are the things which I really want to bring to perspective, right? That these are the things which we have worked upon. And these are typical examples, right? If transshipment is happening, transshipment is a very common event which happens. And there is no visibility around that. There's also a risk element because, you're like you do in a normal life. If you want to change trains at a specific station, and if you're delayed by a minute or two, you just miss your connection. Same happens with the container. If the first container is not offloaded, it is not processed through, all the documentation is not processed, you will miss the next ship. The customer then needs to know in the right moment what is the updated ETA. And all these things can only happen when the exchange of information goes via the same principles. Case in point right now is, if you're talking data exchange, you're talking data interfaces. One data interface is based on EDI. The other one is API. Then the consumer is connected on EDI. So there's a whole lot of mapping, which I'm pretty sure you also mentioned in your pain point, right? Which goes on. What we are working towards from an perspective of DCSA is that API. all three of them are on the same technology layer, then they are using the same standard, which will mean that when you are integrating with each of these parties in your own network, you are able to get this information close to real time, as and when it happens. So these are the things which are kind of solving the problem which you explained, right? Data latency is an issue because the processes are also manual. So that's the component of people involved when I talk about people, process, and technology, right? So these are, and the practices. So there's also a new way of looking at it as practices. What are the practices? There are processes and there are people, but together, both of them are part of practices. What is the practice to share data? We'll share it in 16 hours of, we do batch processing and all these kind of practices which are existing. Are these good enough? And we can only have these conversations once everybody understands these are the components which everyone should be getting. So that's the awareness component.
Right. Yeah. You need to know what you're shooting for. So is it fair to say, to dwell on the technology maturity globally, as a generality, is it fair to say that Europe and North America and the large ports in Asia are sort of like at the far end of maturity? And then as you get into what I would say probably Africa, most of the ports in Africa are pretty low on the maturity level. And then depending probably you could go by volume. If you were to look at the ports by volume, the higher volume is way more mature than the lower volumes. Is that
sure?
Yeah, is that about right?
It's also because they are trying to solve a problem which is at their hand and to be more efficient, right? So there's a need to be efficient, and then there is a need for digitalization coming from the efficiency requirement. So it kind of plays hand in hand, right?
Right. Okay, so we've talked about the sort of status messages. So where else has DCSA focused? You had mentioned booking.
Yes. So if I have to talk about the portfolio of our standards, which are released or which are under development, I can talk about track and trace because that's what I am. Yeah. So I think we did introduce my work at DCSA. So I'm the standards lead for track and trace standards, which we have just talked about for the last half an hour. And that's why I am quite passionate about the subject. But also coming from the portfolio of DCSA standards, we obviously have booking standards. Then there's another component which we have worked upon quite intensively and also collaboratively with the industry is the e-bill of lading, right? And this is a component where I also want to mention that we have been actively engaging with the community. We call it the FIT Alliance, which is comprised of different stakeholders like WIMCO, SWIFT, FIATA, who are working together with us to make e-bill of lading a reality and to work towards collaboratively driving the industry towards e-bill of lading. A step of that was all the container carrier members who are DCSA's founding members had signed a commitment jointly that in 2030 we want to be 100% EBL. So that was the initial thing which happened. I think, if I'm not mistaken, was February 2023. From that point onwards, we have about 200 to 250 people who have signed this up as a commitment, which shows the amount of interest is there from the industry players to be part of it, to also jointly commit that, yes, we want to be part of this revolution towards EBL. But talking about the standardization itself, booking standard is released, the version 1. We are now working towards the next version, which will also have components from the ICS2, for example. That's a new regulation which has been mandated which will be included in it. Then there is a component which we just released on 24th of September, and I reached out to you guys also, is the commercial schedules, also known from a perspective point-to-point routings. And so that is a very important component of the standards we have developed. So these are the standards which are directly impacting the BCO because they are the ones consuming the data coming from these standards. Then on the same length, there's arrival notice and shipping instruction, which is currently in development. Then there's another component, but I see you have a question. So please, let's do the question first.
Yeah. Okay. So on the EBLs, is that so? There are master bills and there are house bills, right? And so for those of you that are sort of new, so a master bill is the bill of lading or the contract of carriage between the steamship line and the person booking with the steamship line, and that could be a BCO, but it could also be the freight forwarder, or an NBO. And if the BCO is contracting with a forwarder, they're going to have a house bill of lading with the forwarder, and the forwarder is going to have a master bill of lading with the steamship line. When you are talking about a standard, is the standard equally applicable to both masters and house bills, or is it
original bills of lading, and then obviously the component which you just explained, right? So those are the components which we are trying to address and standardize upon. Then comes the part of that's why I mentioned banks and insurers, right? Because these are also part of the let's say the trained finance chain, and that's why these are also important. And when I talk about the joint commitment 2030, banks have also signed. So just to give you a reference, right?
Okay.
So then so that's the commercial components of the standard, right? And I say commercial because customer facing, we call it customer facing, commercial in terms of the business direction of it, right? Then there's an operational component, which is between the operational partners, so the vessel operators, container shipping lines. That standard is operational vessel schedules, which is basically the vessel schedule information. These container shipping lines are exchanging with feeders, with terminals, with ports, between themselves to basically have the pro forma schedules there, and then closer towards the actual operational schedule of the vessel and the service and the voyages. So all these are part of the equation of operational vessel schedules. Then is the component what we call just-in-time port calls. Now, the name suggests what it means, right? But essentially, what happens is whenever you want to be on the ship, there's a whole list of timestamps which happen when you are about to arrive, right? So, typically you arrive at the anchorage, then a pilot comes on board, and all the list of operational activities which happen, right? That is also something which was not standardized across the globe, right? So from a container shipping perspective, if you look at it, we have also worked on JIT standard, right? So these are the standards which have been released already. And like I said, arrival notice, shipping instructions are part of our coming roadmap. But importantly, on the other part is we have also recognized that terminals play an important part in the use of the standard, but they're also a source of data. Like I explained, get in data, get out data. Terminal visibility is a big area of concern for a lot of organizations. And from our perspective, if we see it is because the data interface is heavily EDI governed, so to say. There are terminals and terminal operating companies who are using APIs and are also consuming and using the standards we have developed, but there's a big gap, which you also explained, right, from a geography perspective and other things. So this is an area which we think will only strengthen the the data quality of our standards or the data quality in general, which we talked about, right? So imagine a track and trace standard getting the data from an API for a get-in message as and when it happens. So the latency part will go off, those are the components. And then typically these are the problems which are also trickling down all the way to the end consumer. So just to bring that in perspective. And obviously there's VGM. And what I mentioned in the initial part of it, right? EDI. So what we did internally over the last 2 years, and also, doing a refresh as we speak, is an EDI analysis. So we conducted an EDI analysis and we say, okay, what's out there? And we concluded last year, and this is also something which we communicated on our channels. We are able to see that there were around 249 data attributes which was there in an EDI one. And if I look at it from a perspective, there are about 74% of those data attributes were part of the standards. And if we look at it from a message perspective, in some of the messages, the coverage was even more, right? So I'm not saying this from a perspective that, the work is done. You just see that EDI is the governing standard in the industry. If we have to talk about replacement of EDI, you have to give the customers and the users something which they can work with, which solves their problems around EDI, but also gives the same experience or the data attributes like an EDI. That's why we conducted this analysis, and these components which I shared were part of it. And now what we want to do is, we have also done, okay, what are the volumes of the most important EDI messages in the world? They're around booking, they're around track and trace, and probably you also know about IFTSTAs, X12s, 315s, typical use of these messages through the EDI, VGM, Codeco, Kuari. So these are more or less the components of EDI, which are heavy use in the industry. And if we want to create, let's say, evangelize the use of APIs, we also need to make sure that the phase out of EDI happens in a systematic manner. I'm not saying EDI will go away. It's about coexistence, but it's also about how the APIs will slowly catch up on the trajectory which EDI has. Right? So if you have to talk about those kind of things, that's where the roadmap lies.
You're very political, Kshitij. I guess it comes from your role. EDI is long overdue to be phased out, notwithstanding it's insanely pervasive among big players, but it's a total nightmare.
I mean, for companies like for you, right? You are API only, so I guess you know the pain.
No, but we have to deal with. We are at the whim or mercy of our customers, and not only our customer's customer, and what they're able to provide. And so, while I would say our application's design is primarily designed around APIs, almost invariably we are not connecting with outside data sources with APIs. That's not necessarily like freight forwarder. There are some reasonably sophisticated freight forwarders that we're able to connect to them via API. But generally speaking, we are so low tech on data transfer because the formats are all over the place. Their capabilities are all over the place. It's the lowest common denominator for what we're doing, and life would be much easier if everybody was standardized and API ready. But that is not the world that we live in, and you're trying to tackle one piece of that for us, which is amazing. Let me ask you about other data sets that are not really transactional in nature, but certainly challenges for us at 3rd Wave, I expect for lots of people. So things like, one of the big challenges in the industry would be like port codes, right? So there are UN port codes, and there are, CBP has its own set of port codes that it likes to use, which by the way, a port is a port. They're not inventing new ports or whatever. So they all exist in all of these things. They just use a different thing. And the Canadian government uses a different thing. And so do you guys, or are you guys intending to come out with a converter or conversion or something that says this, it's a table, this port is this, or this, depending on what you're using, or you guys are not doing that?
So you explained the problem, right? And it's also like a country problem, right? Each country likes to do it their own way, for example. What we do in our standard is quite simple. We say there are SMTG codes for terminals and the UNLO codes, right? These are the standard codes which you should be using in your location attributes, right? And then combined with the address components from ISO 8366, for example. So that's the recommendation we give on our API specification. Guys, if you want to use a location code, if you want to use a port code, use the UN location codes or use an SMTG terminal code. Because, UNLO codes are a standard, right?
They are a standard. And
yes.
CBP has their standard, and it's annoying.
Exactly. And these are the components which from our perspective, we can only say that these components are, let's say, global in nature, right? So, like I said, geography-wise, everyone has a different way of communicating it, like you mentioned CBP, but also if I go somewhere on the eastern side of the world, there are different types of codes being used. A specific example is also customs. We use a lot of text references and customs in the data, which we've seen right on the booking or on the track and trace. Every government uses a different way of having text references. Sometimes the customer is asking you guys, probably it, to add some references which are customized because that's for their internal system. Now, that's a very broad area which, if we have to standardize, requires a lot of effort with less impact.
Okay.
So what we did was, try to stick to where the standard is. Let's not reinvent the wheel. So at least people consuming the data will know that I will get a UNLO code. And on your end, the exercise then is simple. UNLO code versus CBP.
Right. Yeah. No, fair enough. I was hoping you'd have a better answer to that, but apparently it's my problem. It's okay.
So I know some problems are very country specific. Some problems are very, regulation specific. And we have tried to make sure that we cover as much as possible, as much, let's say, the common denominator which you use, right? So what is the common denominator which we can get everyone to agree upon?
Right. Yeah. So, last maybe topic that I want to ask about. I think it could be a short conversation. So, do you ever get involved, or is the mandate to, as it relates to things like international trade regulation or things like HS codes or even HTS codes or anything like that? Do you what's your perspective on a lot of this trade related data as it relates to trade compliance, as opposed to the operational movement of things, just because you're not moving containers without having to deal with the trade compliance elements. And so is DCSA, are you taking the perspective that, hey, listen, every country is different, there is no standardization, so we're not even getting involved in it? Or are you, do you have a different perspective on it?
So this is another area which I explained in the previous section also, right? We do coordinate with different organizations. So World Trade Organization, World Customs Organization, but this is more to make sure that whatever is getting developed, we are aware of it, but we don't play an active role in deciding an HS code or STC. Or yes, we do have a dangerous code, dangerous goods component in our standards, which will use all the codes which are there. Similarly, talking about UNC-FACT and ED-FACT world also, the same kind of thing. Our main focus area is around the container shipping and the data exchange, which happens in container shipping, the enabling components which get fed into the data of the products which are being shipped, HS codes or dangerous good declaration and everything. We are not developing it, but yes, we are kind of in the loop of the discussions whenever some things are happening. Like I mentioned, ICS2, right? Now that's a regulation which is coming up, and from our side and our public affairs team is involved to understand what is the change and how that impacts our standards work, and how can we bring that towards fruition, so that the standards which you are offer are also compliant from a regulation aspect, and that we do not have to. So to shorten up the answer, if there is a regulatory change which happens from the organizations who are working on HS codes or any other custom regulation or any other requirement which are coming up from an EU perspective or from an American perspective, we make sure that we try to bring that into our discussion and to make that into our standard as a recommendation that these are the components you should be using.
Okay. And then I guess last question, because probably I'll get hammered if I don't ask this, is on carbon and emissions. You must have a perspective on what you guys are or are not doing on that, on the reporting.
We do not have the standards around, let's say, carbon emissions and everything. However, the work we are doing on EBL or just-in-time port calls, commercial schedules, everything is catered towards the aspect of increasing operational efficiency, improving sustainability, going paperless. So that is part of our mission, right? So if we talk about our mission, it's around three things. One is customer experience, improving the customer experience by the use of the standard, and then contributing to the operational efficiency of the whole supply chain and sustainability by making sure that the information which needs to be exchanged goes in the format which does not create any bottleneck. So that's the component we work with. And for the work on the cargo emissions or around all the changes which are being introduced by IMO and the fuel and everything, again, this is an activity taken care by organizations who are dedicated for this. So there's a clean cargo group which is working on it. IMO is making the regulations. We are not a regulatory body. We are just there to understand what are the requirements coming in, and then we make sure that all these requirements are then addressed in our standards work.
All right. Hey, I've got like a million more questions that I want to ask you, but I fear that we've taken up enough of your time this go round, but we'll definitely
and in the beginning, we were thinking maybe 30 minutes might be enough, or 40 minutes might be enough.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Right. So, I want to thank you for taking the time and for chatting about this. It is certainly a topic that's near and dear to our hearts here at 3rd Wave. You guys are doing really a great job at tackling this really challenging problem, and you probably don't get a whole lot of thanks. So let me thank you for the work that you do. It's really been a great, it's been great getting to know you. You're one of our international supply chain mafia members. So we've got a little private LinkedIn group called the International Supply Chain Mafia that you're a part of, which is a bunch of people looking to really make an impact on the international supply chain. So that's a lot of fun. Or geek out over supply chain stuff. So I'm really thrilled that you're part of that, and that we've gotten to know you and the DCSA and the work that you guys are doing. And so keep up the great work. And I'm really looking forward to the next time we have you back on the show.
Sure. And some parting words from my side also, because, like I said, Thank you for the invite. It's always been a pleasure to talk to you, right? And of course, not only you from 3rdwave, but I also know Josh, for example, right? You guys have been big proponents of our work. So yes, keep on doing that. And what I'm expecting you is that whenever the standards are coming in, you are playing an important role in evangelizing the use of those standards, starting with you, of course. And it's about getting the industry together, right? So spreading the word, getting the industry together, spread it to your customers. Say, there's a standard which will enable these things for you. We have talked about all the things which standardization effort is solving. So make that as something which will contribute towards the betterment of the supply chain, but also bring the whole industry towards a shift in the digitalization space. So that's my parting message. And of course, we'll chat on our own little private secret group which we have on LinkedIn. But it's been a pleasure from my side as well, Grant. And we will keep in touch. And I'm looking forward to getting to this.
Right on. Kshitij Parashar, thank you so much for taking the time today. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to 3rdwave Trade Talks. To get in touch and learn more about what we do, visit our website at 3rdwave.co. There you'll find more resources to enrich your knowledge of global trade. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you next time.